Good morning, it's the Book Traveller, and hope you are all well. I'm here today in Zurich, in Switzerland. As you can see outside my window here, it's a bit of a grey day. I had been hoping to go down to Lake Zurich, which is about a 20-minute tram ride away from where I'm staying here today. But it is pouring down outside and not quite the weather to be out reading books on the shores of Lake Zurich. Unfortunately, I am staying inside, and I'll let you look at the view of the rolling dark clouds go past me as we carry on reading the final few chapters of The Sanctuary here. We are up to chapter 26, which is on page 298. Not too far to go towards the end, so we're getting towards the crux of the story. So I'll crack straight on with chapter 26. John was quiet this morning. The island was being scourged with rain. Even on the tree-covered paths it was coming down hard, the drops swelling fatly on the leaves before they fell. I had woken after only a few hours of broken sleep and hurried back to the lodge. I was relieved to see the rain had battered any footprints from last night out of existence. All that mattered was to stay here until Kara was back, to cling on a day or two longer to ensure I didn't miss her. The thought of leaving the island and John was terrible, but the idea of being sent away just as she was on the brink of returning, our paths crossing as the island was closed, that was worse. I would find out that just a little bit more about John, find out the truth about this firm, Aramonth, and then she would return, and we would carry on with our life together. All would be well. All would be well. There was nobody on the lower floor of the lodge, as far as I could tell, so I made my way upstairs. I heard nothing in response to my knock, but words being spoken aloud, so I opened the door, thinking I was being summoned. My eyes met an extraordinary sight. The back half of the bedroom floor was slick and dark with rain, which ran down towards the guttering by the wall in dancing rivulets. Just inside the dry half was John's table, strewn with papers covered with tiny annotations, and in the open half of the room, facing outwards towards, stood John himself, fully beneath the downpour, wearing a plain shirt and trousers slick to the skin. Standing there between the stone columns, his head glistening in the rain, he looked like a sorcerer, something far beyond a normal man. I must have made some noise, or perhaps the door closed too loudly behind me, because he turned then. I saw he was holding one of the pieces of paper, even as it disintegrated in the rain. His face, lost in abstraction, became a mask of anger when he noticed me. He gestured to the door and swore, loud enough that I heard him over the noise of the elements. In a few seconds I was on the other side of the door again, hurrying back to the stairs, stumbling down them into the corridor of ancient ferns. I waited downstairs, reflecting on what I had seen, wondering what it could mean, panicking. He had never sworn at me like that. My footprints must have been found. I had been seen last night. Had John spotted me at the window? Had night followed me back through the dark? Had Bianca told him I had phoned the mainland to finally win his favour? She was so maddened by his withheld love, I would not blame her especially, but I could not be sent away from here, not from my painting, not as Kara was on the brink of returning. I would lie, denounce the others, do whatever was required. There was a noise on the stair and John stepped into the room. Gone was the madman standing beneath the open sky. He had dried himself, changed his shirt, looked normal once more. Ben! I'm so sorry for interrupting you, John. I didn't mean. Forget it. Come on. Back in the room, the desk had been stowed against the wall, and the papers had vanished. What had they been? I had hardly seen him with paperwork before. He prided himself on his ability to get by without it. But these papers had looked old and yellowed, personal somehow. I wondered if I had yet again stumbled over one of the fiches between Jacob Mann and John Pemberley. The rain had quietened by now, but it would still have been enough to ruin the painting in a few seconds. Thank God it was tucked in its usual corner, well under the roof, far from the elements. Even so, for the morning session, I had to bring John and the canvas towards the door to make sure it stayed dry. That didn't matter, the background was complete, and all I was focusing on today was his face. I moved backwards and forwards, observing and dabbing. In the last couple of sessions, John's expression on the canvas had been slowly evolving, and although I could not tell you how it would look at last, I knew I had to trust my hand and eye. He interrupted my thoughts. Do you remember the thought experiment from your second night here? The one about the oak trees? The magic button Angela offered me. Exactly. Would you still press it? Damn the species to guarantee healthy individuals. I hope I would, but you never really know with these questions of principle until you actually to do it. I was standing right by him, close up, making a tiny adjustment to the line of his brows. You are right, Ben. It depends who you are, or who you have been forced to become. He paused. Anything else worrying you? Kara. The name had forced itself out. I'm starting to really worry. If she would only contact me, if I could just hear her voice once. Christ, Ben, John's brow furrowed. She hasn't been spirited away. She's still on the fucking payroll. She will be back tomorrow, a full day before closure, and if she isn't, although definitely will be, you can leave without so much as saying goodbye, all right? You said it would just be a few days until her return when we first spoke. That was 2 weeks ago. He frowned again, and I saw once more the twist of the features that had startled me when I first entered, the sorcerer's glare. Honestly, Ben, you should know by now we don't throw away our most valuable people, and you and Kara are valuable to us. She'll be back. I think you're simply worried she won't want to talk to you when she gets here, that she's still angry with you for bringing yourself here without permission. Is that it? I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, unable to speak. He was right. I was worried about how I stood with Kara. That was all it was. I must keep reminding myself of the truth. I took a long breath. Thank you, John. Forget it. Let's continue. At that moment, I stepped away from the canvas again, back to my usual point near the door, and really looked at it for the first time this morning. I must have stood there too long, surveying it, trying to remain calm, because John made some comment or joke, and I hastily resumed the work, but there was no denying what I had seen. Under my hands, the face I was painting had taken on an aspect of menace. The benevolent command was replaced by a grim authority. The wisdom had become low cunning. The corner of the mouth bent with a wry humanity had now been supplanted by a sneer of base cruelty. And the worst part of it was that I was looking from the canvas to the subject and back again. I thought I had done my job faithfully and well. I ended the session abruptly after that shock. The thought that had returned to me as I put away my brushes was of the sight that had greeted me this morning, of John pacing around his room in the storm. What had he been reading? Was it the paperwork of his forgotten life, or his plan for the world to come? There was so much to do. I had to learn more from Knight somehow, without arousing her suspicion. I had to talk to Bianca, but first and foremost I had to know about Jacob Mann and the firm that had paid for his childhood at Hillcrest. The rain had slackened during the sitting, and I had arrived at the library of the Hub hardly damp. The librarian there was unsurprised to see me. She was more obviously pregnant now, and moved slowly and with difficulty as she took me to the information bay. When she was gone, I found the yellowed concordance of the papers again, and wondered how I was going to do this. I had the name of the law firm, Aramonth Partners. I had John's real name, or what Bianca believed to be his real name, Jacob Mann. And running away into the murk, I had 1,000 newspapers from the last century, miniaturized. He must have left a mark somewhere. But where? Kevin Ladd, the journalist I had tried to phone on the way here, he might have found out about the firm, investigated them too, but he was dead, his papers burned, and his widow wasn't talking. Kevin Ladd, Paramount Partners, Jacob Mann. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to narrow the search. If I started at random among these papers, I'd be looking for 100 years. I buried my head in my hands. After a while, I rose from the desk and wandered the rest of the library, hoping for something that could help me. Did they have such a thing as a directory of companies? That might help. The reference section was a tall room, off to one side containing 100 dictionaries and encyclopedias. High up on a shelf, another collection caught my eye, a lengthy series of volumes half falling apart. A list of firms, a guide to company registrations in this country, and a few others. The hunt paid off. Aramonth Partners was listed in there. Ownership, private, of course. There was no way a firm in this secretive world would let its real owners be known. But there was a list of associated firms too, threads to elsewhere in the huge series of books. I pulled several off the shelves. 20 minutes later, I found one lead, and it looked strong. Insular Incorporated. Founder, Mann, I. Location, Eugene, Oregon. It was followed by a date of incorporation from a half-century ago. The initial was clearly an I, not a J, and I was looking for Jacob Mann. Then again, Jacob Mann wouldn't be the name I needed. I needed his parents' generation. Bianca had said something about her father's name, something biblical, that was it. Jacob had been the son of Isaac. This could be a firm founded by John's father, Insular, based in Eugene, Oregon. I knew nothing about it, but that was a start. Back to the microfilm. As I reached the microfilm bay, I risked a look back at the librarian at her desk. She was reading, lost in a world of her own. I could see from here it was some obscure work by Shelley. And paying no attention to me, a search for the local papers in Oregon could hardly attract attention. Each of the newspapers, miniaturized and stored here, had a location on the shelves that I could navigate to with the paper guide. The city of Eugene had only one local paper, which was stored in a couple of reels halfway up one of the ladders, a long way back. The building had sensors installed to track movement, and the shelves around you lit up with a gentle glow as you approached them, as if conscious of your proximity. I found the reels I was looking for, removed them from their holsters, and loaded the first in the machine. I knew the date of the firm's incorporation and guessed the following couple of months might be the likeliest to yield results. 20 minutes later, I had found no mentions among the thickets of headlines. Eugene was a quiet place. The decade I was searching through had been a turbulent one for the world, but it seemed to have passed the city by. The cluttered paraphernalia of the past, sports fixtures, local politics, the life of a small city, spun by beneath my fingers. How many of the babies in the birth column had led the lives of the parents I'd imagined in this foundering world? Physically, I began to suffer. Crouching on the bench to look through the metal goggles was starting to fold my spine, and the harsh light behind the blown-up screen below me was making my eyes stream. I carried on. I stopped at one article. I could not tell why. The headline ran, "New Church Subject of Local Complaints," and I would have passed it by entirely except the word insular had been lurking in the first sentence, and it must have caught my eye. This was it. This was the company John's father had built. Not a company, but a church. The residential community known as Insular and located on the Green Mauritian Plain, 10 miles outside the city limits, has in recent weeks been the subject of complaints from local farmers who say it has become a residential area without adhering to the local regulations controlling such. The number of people living there is claimed to be beyond 500, all housed, fed and working on the site, when not travelling around the state and beyond recruiting new members to join them. Founder Isaac Mann explained to our correspondent that land, being legally his and not registered as arable, is exempt from the rules his neighbours are obliged to observe, and any further complaints would naturally be dealt with in the open and positive manner he is still instilling in his flock. That was John's father. Even seeing him reported indirectly in the local paper from 50 years ago gave me a low, deep thrill, like an archaeologist who had found the fossilized outline of some monstrous ancient creature, until now only hypothesized. Even better, I knew now to look for any mention of a church or a new church. The next came a couple of months later. The church had been recruiting aggressively, some locals claimed, not just from other churches, but from cities across the region. They were taking anyone they could, enlisting people from the streets, sucking up heirs and orphans and anyone with trouble in their life, giving them purpose, a mission, unending acceptance from the highest power imaginable. The numbers had swollen to 1,000. The place was described by Mann as a community for further revelation of the messages of God, and many of the residents there were paying to take courses. If you had no money, the church would accept your car or urge you to start applying for loans. Mann himself was travelling the country raising funds to spread the word. There were other outposts being built around the country. It seemed more starter churches, which took the lead from him and paid their tithes, but they all led back to the Green Mauritian Plain. The headlines multiplied, telling lurid stories of disturbances out in the darkness. Each time, Isaac Mann appeared in the paper to respond, explaining away whatever state of affairs the newspaper had alleged, expertly sanding the corners off the story, making everything sound reasonable once more. That was not his only tactic. The newspaper began to hint at legal threats against it for asking questions, then at blatant intimidation. There were photographs of notes its reporters had received, a picture of a car smashed into a lamppost with a rock through its window. The newspaper seemed uncowed. Editorials asserted the truths. The paper's staff would not flinch to investigate. Nevertheless, the bylines on the stories changed, as if multiple reporters had been scared off the story. Then, for 6 months, the church was absent from the headlines. There were no mentions. Perhaps the threats had worked. I wound through and through, losing all track of time, forgetting the strain on my eyes and my back, my fingers aching as I hauled the machine's iron spindles to turn to the next week's edition. And then, after nearly a year without any mention, the front page ran a headline I couldn't miss. Raid at Green Martin. 34 years ago, the state authorities, accompanied by federal troops, had launched a raid on the church in response to claims of abduction, abuse, even torture inflicted by senior members of their flock. The action had been prompted by the parents of a young woman there who had arrived, tried to see her, and been denied access. They were told she had rejected them and the outside world. They had managed to persuade a single state trooper to take an interest. When he had arrived, there was no chance for Isaac Mann to smooth things over. His followers, taking matters into their own hands, had attacked the trooper. He had barely made it back to his car alive. This skirmish had set a course that Isaac Mann, had not anticipated, but relished regardless. The law had arrived in greater numbers and been fired upon. After the loss of several officers, reinforcements had arrived. After much debate about what to do, with the children present, the place had been stormed. Isaac Mann spent the siege in a white stucco tower at the centre of the compound, commanding operations, calling the children of the law to defend their kingdom. The newspaper contained a photo of his body, hunched and circled, a tangle of limbs arranged into a ghastly mandala on the floor. A leak from the coroner noted that, as well as the bullets in his front, he had been wounded once in the side with a large knife, but speculated no further. Children had been found there, dozens of them. The place had specialized in fertility. Church members claimed with pride that many had been fathered by Mann himself. Apart from a few bricks of banknotes, there was no sign of the dozens of fortunes his followers had poured into the church. The people of Green Martin were distributed and filtered to their various fates. Some were held pending prosecution, others were kept under armed guard in hospital. The children of the place were not mentioned again. And at the end, as if in rebuke of the violence and chaos of the preceding few pages, there was a black and white photo of a sunlit group staring at the camera. The clothes were simple, and the 20 or so people framed were smiling. At the centre of the shot stood a man, hirsute and beaming in a robe. The structure of his bones looked very familiar. Before him, at his right hand, stood a boy, who must have been in his early teens, squinting into the light, a gap in his teeth. The last happy time at Green Martin, the caption read. One other aspect seemed oddly familiar. Standing at the back of the shot, looking with a dazzling smile at Isaac Mann, stood a young woman who, half a century on, with the coarsening mantle of time gathered around her, might have come to look remarkably like Angela Knight. And into chapter 27. Bit of coffee first. Chapter 27. We are closing now. May I take these for you? The librarian had approached me softly. Her voice had come as a shock. I glanced at her belly, and she smiled. Don't worry, I won't be climbing any ladders. I'll keep them safely under the desk, and my assistant will return them tomorrow. No, I did my best to sound normal. No, that's fine. It won't take me a minute to return them. Thank you. She smiled on me and waddled to her desk. Across the room was an ancient machine to copy the photo, to restore it to life size, and I did. It was a little grainy, but the faces were still very visible enough, and that was all that mattered. Proof, I took the copy into the back of Thomas's notebook. One other thing disconcerted me. When I got to the top of the ladder and returned to return the reel to its shelf, I could not help noticing the layer of dust along the front of it, interrupted where I had pulled the canister out, but beside it, on a part of the shelf I had not touched, was a set of small finger marks in the dust. Someone else had been here before me. Another islander? The marks were far smaller than my own. It did not look like John himself had been here. Knight? Someone else? A treacherous voice whispered another name to me. Kara. She had looked these up and been spirited away. It could not be. It could not. I drove the thought from my mind. I stumbled outside to the hub, where a crowd was arriving at the hall for the evening meal. After a minute, composing myself in the shadow of the library, I entered the hall and remembered as I approached the table the previous night's interview with Knight at her cottage. Bianca was to my right, and yet I could not stutter out more than a few words of awkward greeting to her before we were standing, and John was arriving, praying us to take our seats, taking his usual stand at the dais. 2 days, my friends, 2 days until we enter our next phase, all of us together are like a great hub entering the chrysalis. We don't know what the conditions will be like out there when we emerge. We only know that we will face that world, whatever it contains, with unity and purpose. Cheers at this. Then came dinner. John seemed aware of some friction around the table. Bianca was not meeting my gaze. Knight was smoking at some secret known only to herself, occasionally flicking a small confiding smile in my direction. Only John, Monroe, and our guests seemed relatively normal. John, as usual, led the conversation. So, 2 days, you ready for it, Monroe? His personal bulldog smiled instantly and solely his creature. I can't wait, sir. Hear that, Ben? 6 years here and he still calls me sir. Special dispensation for former squaddies. How about you, eh? You ready? Of course. He gestured at me with his fork. That's what I mean, Ange. Those who shall inherit the earth, not the meek, I would say, but the people who are willing to do the work. She nodded and smiled at me again. At the end of the meal, as our whole group was moving towards the door, I found a moment to mutter to Bianca, "We have to speak. Everyone's going to the lodge. We can speak there." "Not there. Now. Privately, please." We waited as they set off, telling them we would catch up and stroll to the edge of the hub to the circular path that stretched around its edge. She stared across the hub, and in her glistening eyes I saw the reflections from the evening's fires. She listened, expressionless, as I told her everything from the last day, my meeting with Knight, Knight's meeting with John. Finally, I told her about this afternoon's discoveries in the library. You see, nobody recovered the church's money. Isaac Mann was killed in the raid. The children were taken into care. One of them was clearly the favoured one. He must have been designated the sole recipient. His name would have been changed. He would have been sent overseas, educated, and after enough time has passed, he inherits his fortune and starts to build this place. The villages on the mainland, everything here, they're all the same thing. The only reason it looks normal to us is that we don't know what prompted it. The authorities would never have let him inherit it, not if it was the proceeds of crime, and enough people would know his identity to monitor him as he grew up. Would they? Or could he have slipped through, ensured his real identity was lost, quietly paid off the only people who knew it? Bianca said nothing for a few seconds, and we both looked out across the hub at the buildings and the tangle of lights beyond. I broke the silence. This whole place is founded on a wound. We still don't have the proof we need, Ben. You have a name I gave you, which is worth almost nothing. No, don't interrupt me. I'm just trying to lay out how flimsy it would sound in court, especially if it was doing the talking. You have the name of a law firm from your elderly teacher who might have forgotten it or made it up anyway. A firm that has hundreds of clients around the world, and you have this church where someone happens to have the name I gave you. How do you know I didn't find out about the place and build it from there? Fabricate a link between Jacob Mann and John Pemberley. That's what they'd say. There was a photo. I made a copy. Look at it. It was in my pocket still, and I showed it to her. Bianca glanced at it briefly, then looked back out across the hub. That could be anyone. Cameras were worse back then. You can barely see his face in it. How do you know? You hardly looked. And then a realization. You've seen these files before. It was you who looked them up. Those were your fingerprints on the shelf. She did not seem embarrassed to hear it, nor did she deny it. How did he manage it? I guessed the biblical link, Jacob, son of Isaac. There weren't many people called Isaac Mann from that time, not with his money, and I had time to do a lot of searching. Why did he let you install the newspaper archive if he thought these papers might lead back to him? She shrugged. He didn't know I knew his real name. He probably forgot he'd ever mentioned it to my mother, and I suspect he didn't imagine I was capable of doing the work to find that handful of articles leading back to him. You just happened to have one extra strand I didn't have. Fentiman. She nodded. It's still not provable, of course. What would we rely on? The word of an unstable girl, the vengeful, disturbed daughter of the philanthropic billionaire? Plus a retired teacher and a jealous young man worried about his missing girlfriend? She laughed. Do me a favor. Show me how this stops him. It doesn't even slow him down. You know the boy in the photo is your father. You do. You saw Knight standing behind him. I take it. She's been with him since the beginning. She shrugged. What can we do about this, even if it is true? I had no answer, but I spotted then a little of the cautious determination I had seen so much of her in her father. John will argue it's all untrue, and even if true, it's not relevant. You don't think it might be relevant to this place, that he grew up in a death cult? He'll say it was a religious community, one that ended with violence and murders. He'll have a backup identity ready, or 10. We won't pin it on him. I realized she had hoped for some unassailable evidence far beyond the few facts I'd been able to present her with. Facts she already knew, and now she was demolishing everything I'd discovered to punish me for not finding what she needed. Jesus, Bianca. He's literally recreated the place he grew up in. He used the church money to build this place, and we know nothing about what he's really doing. Nothing at all. She was trembling, and lowered her head so I could not see her face. Bianca, it's me. It's Ben. I haven't changed. I think you believe the worst about this place, and I'm saying I understand why. All I can do is offer to help you. She turned to me, and her face was streaked with tears. I felt relief that she was suffering just as I was, and shame too, at the joy I felt in knowing it, and then I remembered. There's something else I saw today, something I think might help us. Where? I nodded along the path towards the lodge. We had spoken about how we would do it as we walked, in low voices. The daylight had faded as we moved. We arrived in a darkness. The lodge lay ahead of us. Ready? Not really. If I'm found and kicked out, you'll at least be able to go back to the normal life here, without an idiot painter causing trouble, won't you? Normal was awful. I'd rather not go back to that. She smiled at me, and I thought for a second how beautiful her mother must have been, to so overwhelm even John's strong features. The room was crammed as usual with smoke and conversation, a mix of island types filling the armchairs, standing in the corners enjoying intrigues. As we passed them, I glanced at their faces, suddenly more lupine than I had ever noticed before, and wondered, had they always looked like that, and had I been too blinded by this place to see it? Or had they changed in the last few days as the island approached its closure from the world beyond? At the heart of the room, surrounded by all of it, sat John. The young troublemaker's return, he boomed, and I realized he had enjoyed the wine at dinner. Angela, Bianca began, I wanted to ask you something about the biobank. I could see Knight was flattered, and Bianca launched into such a technical question that John groaned and interrupted. None of that, take it outside. Bianca led Knight away to the back of the room, the opposite direction to the corridor. My turn. John, I'm really sorry. I left a brush in your room after today's session. Do you mind if I go up and get it? It can wait, can't it? I shook my head, anguished. It's a brush I really need for the fine details. Stupidly forgot to take it away to clean it. Already might be half ruined. Paint with a tuft of hair, or get some bristles from Monroe here. He cackled at his joke. Monroe, as hairless as Pemberley, but less drunk, tried to laugh along. Is it all right for me to just pop up? I won't be a minute. He waved a hand. Forget it. I sighed, looked anxious, knitted my brow, and eventually, after a couple of minutes, John swore at me and fumbled in his pocket for a key, which he handed to me. Christ, song and dance show, you know where it is. As I stood to leave the circle, I spotted Bianca keeping Knight facing the other way. Her lips were pressed, her forehead corrugated with worry. Her eyes flickered to me for a brief moment before she returned to keeping Knight's full attention. The corridor was cool and quiet, and as I went, I checked again that the brush I'd put in my pocket earlier in the day was still there, a flimsy alibi, and useless if I was interrupted, of course, but better than nothing. John's room was as I had left it earlier. The canvas was in the corner, covered so he would see nothing of the painting until it was ready. I pulled it out, turned it so it faced away from the door, and took the cover off. If anyone came in, I could claim to be working on it. Next to it was the bookcase, which I had hoped would contain the bundle of papers John had been reading earlier. There was no time to look at the books now. A couple of titles jumped out at me, tomes on the future, on forestry, on acid seas and hazy skies, and incongruous among them, so Fentiman had been telling the truth. 3 simple bound volumes with Pride and Prejudice in tiny neat writing on their sides. I couldn't see a bundle of papers. But one volume, lower down, wasn't a book at all. It had a spine, but the top was smooth lacquer painted to look like gathered pages. It was a beautiful box of sweet-smelling maplewood, the corners real leather, rubbed with age, and as I pulled it out, I saw that the front bore a symbol, an impossible knot, futuristic and ancient. There was no lock, and inside were the same papers, now stained with rain, I had seen earlier. They seemed to form a collection of speeches. They were annotated in the hand I knew as John's from seeing him sign documents. The dates at the top proclaimed them to be 25 years old, from his early 20s. I replaced the box on the shelf, placed the papers on the easel, and read. Were we created, stooped and haggard, creatures who only consume the earth's resources? We were not. Were we created to rob the future from our children? We were not. We were created with youth, with health. We were created to create more, something almost all of us do at the start of life, not its end. For 10,000 years we have been working with our forefathers, a great collusion stretching backwards from our modern catastrophe. What success we have enjoyed. No need to invent the plough or the spade or the gun with each passing generation. We have been holding hands in a great chain stretching back to the earliest days. And where has this chain led us? It has led us build ourselves up into countries with governments, with bombs, with limitless resources for our own destruction. I say again, this great chain will destroy us. It has brought us medicines, inventions, 1,000 novelties to give our lives ease. Yet look at the suffering the chain has brought forth. Look at the squalor and the pain of most human lives. For every perfect life in this new world, there are 1,000 lives of poverty and indignity in our own species. Let alone the billions of animals that suffer for us. Look at the fortunes built and the left in vaults unshared. The men who created those fortunes have denied them to the world. They pass the wealth on to their children and their children's children, and the wealth and the corruption have thickened like tar. The world has grown old, and before long we will all be dependent on the few young people remaining. How are we to recover? There is only one answer, my friends. We must make the world young again. I will not rest until our whole species is one of young, strong gardeners. It is worth launching a lifeboat if your ship is sinking. And it's worth sinking the ship to ensure the lifeboats get away. Steps approaching the door. No time to put the papers back in the box, no place to hide them, only a few seconds to gather them into one pile, resting on the easel. John. The word had been whispered. Night was standing in the doorway with a look of hesitant expectancy, half hope, half doubt. When she saw me around the easel, standing at the canvas, it was replaced by our customary look of frost. You shouldn't be in here. In reply, I gestured to the canvas before me. Thank God I had moved it so she couldn't see it from where she stood. I just came in to fetch a brush, and I got distracted looking at the painting. The papers were in front of me, resting on the bottom of the canvas. As long as she didn't approach, she couldn't see them. May I see? She started moving around towards the canvas. No, I spoke with an authority I hardly felt, and she stopped. The painting can never be seen until it's finished, not ever. It would be a gross invasion of privacy, would it? Yes. Almost as great as you loitering in this room without John's consent. He told me I could come in here, but I'll leave. You should. Under her eye, I put the cover back on the canvas, concealing the pages as I did so. I could only hope John wouldn't open the box again before I returned tomorrow for our final sitting. As I left, Angela spoke softly. I'm sure it's a wonderful picture, to justify you spending your time up here looking at it. It's one of my better ones. That's good. He deserves the best, you know. He's suffered so much for us all. And to accompany these words, she gave me a perfectly innocent smile. As John said good night to me back downstairs, he stood and clasped my hand as I offered him the key. Did you get it? Get what? The brush. Yes, I did. I fumbled in my pocket to show it. But too late. He had already turned to the others. The painting is saved. The artist has recovered his sacred object. He lapsed back onto the sofa to argue something with Munro, and I quietly left. As I went, Angela Knight was standing at John's shoulder, waiting to speak to him, and she glanced at me with malevolence. I was glad the cover was secured over the portrait. Bianca was outside. I'm sorry I kept her as long as I could. You did well. I had lots of time before she got there. I would never have managed that without you. We walked in the crisp, hollow moonlight, and I told her about the speech I had read. She thought for a while after I had finished, then spoke. There used to be something called the Dark Green Groups. I read about them in the library. They were operating around that time. Often wondered if we would have been tempted to get caught up with them, but I had no evidence. She paused. The idea of breaking the chain with everyone above us. He's talked about it before. He's fascinated by the idea of new men, I dare say. He's asked you about your father. I told him the truth. My father died when I was young. No wonder John likes you. The cottage was in sight now. The studio Pemberley had built on its side was paler than the rest of the building. I had thought it looked benign in its first week, but with the dimples on its surface, the streaks left by the raindrops on its white round wall, now it looked like a monstrous fungus. What do we do? I said. We could leave. She spoke the words quickly, as though she had only been waiting for me to ask. There are container ships going until the day before the closure. You'd never get on. You're too recognizable. So I smuggle myself on, go in a disguise, go in a sack of potatoes. I laughed and she joined in, but I knew she was serious. I don't think we should, Bianca. Not yet. No? No, for one thing, I wouldn't finish my painting. You're not serious. Fuck the painting. I mean it. It doesn't matter whether John's a good man or not. It's a good painting, my only good one. Perhaps I want to finish it. Ben, you can't commit your life here to one day's work on a painting. If you're saying he's not a good man, then we have to leave. No, we have time. I know we have time, but if I don't finish this, I'll regret it until I die. The old man in the harbour of Freeborn spoke to me again out of the darkness. Because he's the devil. You keep giving him the benefit of the doubt. Time and again he relies on that from people, and they give it to him. It's like magic. You keep giving him the benefit of doubt. I'm just saying, the speeches of a man at 20. She turned to face me. Christ, Ben, open your eyes. There's no difference between this John and the man who delivered the speeches you found, except he's found a way to conceal his ideas until he acts on them. You've seen this place. It's a cult of youth. It's designed as a rebuke at age. He still believes all this. I conceded that and she continued. And what about this thing and he and Knight are talking about, this maneuver, this operation, whatever it is? I'm not sure. I think it's something to do with the rats. God knows what, but Knight seems twitchy about that. Well, if you're still painting away, I'll have to be the one to find out about it. What are you going to do? There's a lab where Knight goes in the daytime, under the biobank. I'll bluff my way in, tell them there's some emergency, that I need access on her behalf. You've seen how the other islanders treat me. They think I'm still his heir still, whatever he says. Are you sure you can do it? I've had quite enough experience of pretending to be something I'm not, Ben. There seemed to be little more use talking her out of it, and I could actually imagine some of the islands letting her through on the strength of her father's features, unless, of course, Knight had explicitly instructed them otherwise. So I merely nodded. She turned to go, and as she did, I could not help asking the question I had been thinking of since I left the library earlier in the day. Do you think she's alive? She looked back. Kara? I nodded again. Yes, Ben, I do. Why? John cares about you, so I think he'd preserve something you wanted. I'm sure she's fine. Ben, wherever she is. Her face was half in shadow as she said it, and I saw that just as I had encouraged her, despite my doubts about her chance of success, she had reassured me about Kara solely to please me, no matter how deluded she thought I was. Well, things are hotting up. Only 2 or 3 chapters left to read, so we're very close to finding the truth about the sanctuary and what lies beneath. And will Kara ever turn up? I guess all will be really revealed as we move on to chapter 28 next time we have a read. Thanks for joining me, and look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good day.